Thank you, Chairman Scott Fox, for holding today's hearing. I also want to thank our witnesses for being here this morning. I'm very concerned with protecting the right to free speech, but I'm equally as concerned with protecting the rights of minority students seeking access to a higher education. This year alone, we have seen a slew of vicious attacks on minority students across this country. At American University, bananas were hung from nooses after a member of my sorority, an African-American woman, was elected president of the University Student Government Association. At the University of Maryland, Richard Collins III, an African-American who was set to graduate to be commissioned as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army, was stabbed to death by another student that was indoctrinated by white supremacists. A fraternity at Baylor University sponsored a fraternity, excuse me, at Baylor University sponsored a Mexican-themed party complete with a border wall and offensive Mexican stereotypes. And the list of such incidents goes on and on. So yes, I'm concerned with what is taking place on our campuses. Students are being singled out and harassed on the basis of their race, sexuality, religion, and physical ability. I fear that the value of free speech is being used as political cover in a manner inconsistent with the First Amendment to harass and assault our most vulnerable student groups. We must not make the mistake of creating a false equivalency between the responsibility we have to protect the rhetoric of white supremacists and defending our female, LGBTQ, Black, brown, Muslim, and disabled students from hateful attacks. The doctrine of both sides threaten to further legitimize extreme and violent behavior and compromise the clearly embattled rights of minority students. With these concerns in mind, I would like to ask a question of Ms. Nossel. When is the First Amendment most often invoked on college campuses, and why is this alarming? And does data support these claims?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're alluding to is that particularly over the last 18 months or so, we've had a series of speakers who've gone from campus to campus with a very provocative, and at times intimidating message, threatening to, for example, out students who may be undocumented or goading students based on their sexual orientation or their race. And the First Amendment comes up very prominently as they assert their rights to come to campus, those who've invited them, defend against time, place, and manner restrictions that might limit when and where they can speak. And I think the real risk of this is that students come to know the First Amendment as something that's relevant only to protect speech that offends and intimidates them. And I think that's very dangerous. We've talked a lot about the fact that the students lack grounding in the First Amendment, they don't understand it, they're not educated in those principles from a young age, and when they encounter them only in this way, you can understand why some students, we had a student at one of our convenings say, the First Amendment wasn't written for me. And I was shocked as a law graduate to hear her say that, but what she meant was, at the time it was written, her forebears would not have been at the table. They were not considered 3/4 of a person, and that the only way she hears it invoked is to protect this speech that is targeting her. So I think if colleges are not cognizant of those concerns and considerations and how we build a culture across gender, race, identity of respect for the First Amendment, how students can utilize the First Amendment to assert their own rights, I think we run a real risk of raising a generation that is alienated from this core principle. And I think that's one of the real dangers of politicizing this issue.
And how to do today's demographics of student population affect education and how college campuses are operating?
Yeah, I mean, I think many of these campuses, originated to serve a student body that was quite homogenous, elite, male, white, and those demographics have changed dramatically. Students are coming from radically different backgrounds, and yet many of the practices and norms on those campuses haven't adapted. So the way things are talked about in the classroom, the way the courses that are offered, And I do think the university needs to continue to adapt. A lot has been done, and many universities have been at the forefront of this in terms of, what it takes to make a student who is from a poor background feel just as comfortable and able to participate in campus life than someone who comes from an elite suburban high school. But there's more work to be done to make the campus fully inclusive, and that work needs to progress if we are to effectively defend the First Amendment and free speech on campus.
Thank you. Thank you so much.